Hello, Sin in Space fans. This week, there's not really much of a content warning. One character remains dead, another character remains injured, and the Doctor remains a complete fucking prick. But, enjoy. Sin in Space, Chapter 22. In awkward silence, the little procession walked along the colony street, Kandro and Stillman together, carrying the writer, and Tony bearing the dead girl in his arms. The news had gotten around. Lab work seemed once again to have stopped completely. They escaped the heart-sick stares of the colonists only when they entered Tony's hut in the hospital. He deposited Joan there on his own bed. It was still rumpled from Graham's brief occupancy the night before. They settled the writer on the hospital table. With Anna's help, he removed the torn and bloody clothing from Graham's body. "If you don't need us for anything, Tony, I think we'd better get going," Mimi said. "We ought to stop in and see Polly." "Sure, go ahead. Oh, wait a minute." Jim Kandro turned from his fixed spot in the doorway to listen. Tony beckoned to the black-haired lab administrator to the other side of the room. "Mimi," he said in an undertone, "you ought to know that Polly has a gun. I'm not sure whether Jim knows it or not. You might want it if you're going out again. Anyhow, somebody ought to get it out of there." She nodded. "Where is it?" "Used to be in the baby's crib, but I think I talked her out of that. Don't know now." "Okay, I'll find it. I think we better take it along. Oh, I'll send Hank back here." He was thoughtful. "Anna." She looked up. Her face was set and miserable. "Are you going out with the search party?" he asked, an innocent question to the others who listened with a world of agonizing significance for Anna. Isn't Nick picking the people to go?" "I thought you might want to go. If you're sticking around, you can handle Hank, can't you?" "Oh, yes," she said eagerly. "I'd be much more useful that way, wouldn't I?" He shrugged and tried to figure it out. She was perfectly willing to stay here in the hospital, to expose herself to Graham's physical pain and Hank's inevitable agony, but she was afraid to go out after the baby. Why? Later, he decided, he could talk to her. He went briskly back to the table and began his examination of Graham. The writer was a mess of bruises from his chest up. He cursed feebly when the doctor felt for fractures. Tony set the collarbone and shot him full of sedation. "Your left eardrum is ruptured," he said coldly. "An operation can correct that on Earth." "You bust him, somebody else fixes him," Graham muttered. "Think what you want." He pushed the wheeled table over to the high bed Polly had occupied just a few days earlier. Graham groaned involuntarily as Tony shifted his shoulder. The doctor eased up. "What for?" he stormed at himself. "Why should I be gentle with the dirty sneak?" He glanced hastily at Anna and caught the half-smile on her face as she pulled the covers over the writer. "I'm going in the other room, Graham," Tony said. "You can call me if you need me." "Sure," Graham told him. "I'll call you as soon as I feel ready for another beating. I love it." Tony didn't answer. In the other room, he sat down and faced Anna intently. "Do you know whether any of our people could have done that to him?" "They aren't haters," she said slowly. "If they were, they wouldn't be here. Somebody might fly into a rage and break his jaw, but methodically punishment like that? No. I'll tell you what it reminds me of. Big Ginny. She was killed. She was beaten up, but that wasn't what killed her." "Does it have anything to do with Pitco?" Anna asked. "Why should they beat Graham? Why should they have beaten that woman?" "I don't know." He managed a feeble grin. "You know that." He lowered his voice. "Can you hear him?" "He's in a lot of pain. Shock's worn off. And he hates us. God, he hates us. I'm glad he hasn't got the gun. He's got a byline. That's just as good." Evidently that just occurred to him. Can he hear us in there? He's gloating now. It must be a fantasy about what he's going to do to us. Halliworth through anyway. What difference does it make? All I want now is to find Sonny and get off this damn planet and give up trying. I'm sick of it. "You're not even kidding yourself," she said gently. "How do you think you could fool me?" "All right," he said. "So you think my heart is breaking because Sun Lake's washed up. What good is it going to do me? Anna, will I be seeing you back on Earth? I want us to stay teamed up. When I get into practice..." The woman winced and stood up. She closed the door to the hospital. "He was listening," she said. "He let out a blast of derision that rattled my skull when he heard you talk about going into practice on Earth." Tony pulled her down beside him and held her quietly against his chest. "Ansi," he said once softly. My poor sweet Nancy. He kissed her hair, and they sat very still until Hank knocked on the door. Hank stared at his wife's body, refusing to believe what he saw. She didn't feel much, Tony tried to explain. Just a bad moment, maybe, when her heart gave out. She couldn't have felt anything, or she'd never have gotten so far. We were there at the end, Anna reminded the young man. She was very happy. She wanted to be useful more than anything else in this world. You know that, don't you? And in the end she was. She loved you very much, too. She didn't want you to be unhappy. What did she say? Hank wouldn't tear his eyes from the bed. He stood and stared ceaselessly, as if another moment of looking would show him some fallacy, some error. Did she really say that about loving me? She said... Anna hesitated, then went on firmly. She said, tell Hank I want him to be happy all the time. I heard her. She answered Tony's look of surprise. It wasn't much of a lie. Thank you. He sat on the bed beside his wife, his hand caressing the face stained with blood and dust. Tony turned and left the room. In the hospital, Graham was asleep or unconscious again. Tony went back to his own chair in the living room. There were so many hints, so many leads, so many parts of the picture. Somehow it all went together. He tried to concentrate, but his thoughts kept wandering into the hospital where the writer lay beaten as Big Ginny had been beaten, into the bedroom where Joan lay dead of Mars, where Anna was comforting the young man who would never realize if he was lucky that he'd killed Joan himself as surely as if he'd throttled her. The last thing she said before she died, Tony snorted. The last thing she said, with that glorious light in her eyes and a grin of delight on her face, was Brownie. And there it was. Within a few seconds' time, everything raced through his mind. All the clues, the things that fitted together. Big Ginny and Graham's story. Sonny and the mask and Joan's dying words. Everything. He jumped up in furious excitement. No, not everything, he realized. Not the Marcane. That didn't fit. He paced the length of the room and turned to find Anna standing in the bedroom door. Did you call? She asked. What happened? He smiled. He went over and pushed the door closed behind her. Nancy, he said, you just don't know how lucky you are to have a big, strong, intelligent man like me. When are we going to get married? She shook her head. Not until you tell me what it's all about.